Welcome to Leaders in Lending. I'm your host, Jeff Keltner. This week's episode features my conversation with Ryan Coaxum, the VP at Guaranty Bank and Trust. It's maybe not a unique name among banks. I feel like Guaranty Bank is out there a few places, but it's a pretty unique story. Ryan helped start the branch of this bank in Austin area, grew it from just a couple of people and basically no assets to over $450 million in assets and loans, $150 million in deposits, more than 30 people working there. And it's a really interesting story of kind of starting up a banking segment from scratch. We really dive into how they did it, lessons learned, things you would do different if you could. Biggest surprise, what was the most fun? So kind of just exploring that kind of startup founder type story for an early stage bank. And then also delve into Ryan's work in community development. He does that for the bank and its kind of broader reach outside of the Austin area, which I thought was really interesting. He is really focused on kind of workforce of the future, development of that workforce. And that's, I think, in a very holistic way, is an interesting construct to think of it in, because it really is about people and how you develop and nurture and train people in communities. So I thought that was really interesting. And Ryan is one of the first people to describe to me being a banker, and particularly a lender, as a very intimate job. And I thought that was a fascinating description. And you'll have to listen to the episode to figure out why he feels that way. So please enjoy my conversation with Ryan Coaxum. Ryan, thanks for joining us today on the podcast. I really appreciate you making the time.
No, thank you for having me. This is exciting. My first podcast.
Your first well, I remember that we did our prep call and there was an ice storm and you had no power. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the technical gods shine on us today and we don't have any problems.
Yep. Hopefully. Or I think we're doing good in Austin now. So, fingers crossed though.
Fingers crossed. Well, I've started recently all my podcasts asking my guests kind of to give me a little bit of the background of how you got into banking and where you're at. It's not the most common childhood ambition for most of us to get into the banking space. And yet we all kind of found our ways here. And I always like to hear a little bit about the story of what brought you into the space.
Yeah, mine definitely was not a regular story, but I love it no matter what. So I started out as a part-time teller, and I only actually got into tellering because I was actually selling residential real estate. And then my mom came in one day and was like, hey, you kind of got to get off the insurance. And so I was like, okay, well, what can I get in at this time? And I didn't have my degree at the time that I could be like, this is a great profession and I can just kind of ride all the way through. And I chose banking, and I went from part-time teller to full-time to personal banker to banking officer, did a little analyst work. And then in 2017, my boss and I took a leap of faith with him, and I just went with him to start Guaranty Bank and Trust in the Central Texas area.
So this is a really interesting story because not many people kind of start a bank from scratch, or at least, open up a bank in a new area. So walk me through what kind of bank and services and what that was like, kind of going from zero to were you renting an office? Were you working out of a car in a Starbucks the way a lot of startups do? Like what's the experience of kind of starting from scratch in this space?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I mean, I always tell people it felt like we were in a startup, yet we still had a $3 billion bank behind us. And what I mean by that is they had no locations here in the Central Texas area. It was so when we started, it was my boss and I, in his child's playroom. They came and gave us all our equipment. And then we bought this little table from Home Depot that I would sit at right next to his, and our phones were daisy chained to each other. And it was really like, hey, we're doing this. And then after that, we actually went and got a Regis office, and then we shared that. And that was equally kind of horrible and great at the same time. I mean, when he got sick, I would get sick, and it's like, wow, we're really in this box together.
Were you in one little room in Regis, or did you get your own office?
It was one little room, and for a while it was just us working in there. And I remember we hired a lending assistant, and he's like, okay, we have a lending assistant coming in tomorrow, and we have this other little table, and so I'm like, I'm gonna clean our little area so we can make it look like, we're big time. And I guarantee she came in there was like, this is the bank. So
what have I done?
What have I done? And so then after that, we did hire her, and then we went into a office building where we kind of the team went from the three to then I think we kind of packed that with five, and then we got the building that we're currently in, and then we then spread out from downtown Austin to Lakeway to Georgetown and to Westlake, and we are now with 30 plus people and about $460 million in loans, and that was since August 2017.
That is quite the experience. What kind of loans? Like what was the nature of the business that you built in terms of the kinds of lending, the deposits, like what the kind of customers you were serving? And I'll put this in there as a side note, like is where you ended up where you started aiming. I mean, so often we hear about in the startup world the pivot, but the idea like we had this vision of where we were going to go, and then like the market came and told us a little something different, and we changed strategies. So I'm curious, kind of like the nature of the kind of business you built there, and whether or not it's really what you intended to build, or there were some lessons along the way that changed your direction a little bit.
No, definitely. I think it wasn't what we intended to build. I mean, so my boss, Travis Brown, I will say he is a genius. He has a genius credit mind. And so he did primarily commercial real estate lending. And so that was kind of our jump off. That's kind of what paid the bills. However, with me, I love being out in the community. I love meeting people, talking to people. And so a lot of mine were small business. And so when you think about it, it's kind of the best of both worlds. You have your big commercial real estate, sexy loans that actually pay the bills. And then you have the small business that are coming inside the bank and, using the drive through. And, those are the people in the community. And it's awesome to see them, go from, a little architecture firm to a big one. And that for me is everything. And so I would say that, just the trajectory. I mean, as we look back, would we think just in 5 years we'd be at 460 million in loans just in the Austin area? Probably not. You can't think that. I think that's a lot of know-how just on our part. And then I think Austin is just booming and, everybody wants to live here. And so I think it's a lot of things. But, let the good times roll. Let the good times roll.
Laissez les bons temps rouler. I don't think I've spoken another language in this podcast. We're going to make some first today. I wanted to ask you, you talked about your desire to get out in the community, and kind of like, I think that really energizes you. And you had described the role of being a banker, particularly to small businesses, when I talked to you earlier, as what you called an intimate job, which I thought was a really interesting description. I think a lot of people can view it as a very impersonal job in many ways, right? Like mediated by piles of forms and kind of process and procedure. But you viewed it as a very intimate role. So talk to me a little bit about what you mean and why that's important to you and the way you approach the banking you do.
Yeah, so my start of just being in the community stems from my father being a Baptist minister here in a suburb in Austin. And I was able to grow up in the church and see my mom and dad just really give their all, making sure, people had that foundation. So obviously they're in the community, and I always tell people, well, I'm not, trying to do a sermon anytime soon. You don't want that. However, the need for just being in the community definitely stuck. I definitely draw just, power from within with that. And people are really just that energy that just gets me just going. And, with that, I think we have a huge responsibility to our community to give back in so many ways. And I say banking is intimate because it is. I feel like people come to you in good times, they come to you in bad times, they come to you in times of struggle, and they basically say, here I am in a folder. This is my financial history, and here you go. I mean, I don't know many people that actually want to just give their whole financial history to somebody and just let your friend or, somebody just look at that. And so I really think it's a very intimate thing because they're trusting you with, something that they just don't talk about with anybody. I mean, you've always had that friend that's like, oh, how's the stock market doing? My Ferrari goes, 180. And then, they're looking at their actual online banking and it's like, they can't even buy their Starbucks. So So, and that's why I just, I really, really understand the trust that people give us as bankers, and I take it very seriously.
Yeah, it's not even just handing you their lives and their financial history in a folder. It's handing it to you and asking to be judged in a way that I think feels very uncomfortable, right? You're going,
Yeah.
what kind of grade do I get? Teach?
I mean,
How am I
I mean,
doing? Do I
there's
qualify or not? It's a very, I think, anxiety inducing thing for most people to do.
yes. I mean, you got to think as bankers, that is what we are doing. We are risk management and we are judging people. And it's just kind of like, and that's one reason why I think, that's why I think it's so important because that's a big job. And so, but, that leads into other conversations that I'm sure we'll get to.
Well, I want to ask this because you've got this unique experience of having grown this thing from, with the backing of a larger bank, but from kind of 0 to 460. I would say 0 to 60 for car analogy, but 460
Yeah.
sounds
Well, yeah.
better. It's
Zero
more fun.
60, 460.
0 to 460. My car doesn't go that fast, but I wanted to ask, like, what were if you could think about the biggest challenge that came from kind of starting and the biggest like benefit. I think there are oftentimes you can think about nobody knows who we are, whatever the challenges of being kind of a startup. At the same time, there's a lot of advantages to that. And I'm curious, looking back on the past 5 years or so, what do you think were the biggest challenges and biggest advantages you got out of being kind of a startup or a starting from zero kind of experience?
Yeah, the biggest challenges I would say is when we first started, no one knew the name. And then I will say Guarantee Bank, there's actually a lot of Guarantee banks out there. So people would be like, "Oh, are you Guarantee out of blah blah blah?" No. "Oh, I had a banking account with Guarantee." No, that's not that one. So we had to get over that hump. And then then once we got over that hump, it's it's not the people that we maybe have banked in previous banks, but it's kind of uh that newer set that would come in and be like, "Okay, so where is Guarantee?" And then that's when I say, "Well, we're based out of Mount Pleasant, Texas." I will tell you, not a lot of Austinites know where Mount Pleasant is on the map. And yeah, not a lot they don't know where that is. And so then I would say because we didn't actually have a brick and mortar bank with our name on the side of it, it's just kind of like, okay, so we're giving you these things. Y'all are opening these accounts. And mind you, in the early days, I would have to send all the stuff to College Station because that was the closest branch. They would open it
Branch
for
office,
me.
yeah.
Yeah, overnight the stuff back to me, and then I would get it to my customer. So it was really like, what we spent in
Wow.
postage at that time is probably crazy. But yeah, no, then I would say the physical building because there's something about even if you never go to the bank because most of your banking is done online, people
Mhm.
wanted to see that physical building. And I will tell you, once we got into that physical building, and to our luck, we got into an amazing building right in the heart of downtown. And right when you come in, you can see the big G on the side of the building. And
Mm.
that's when people are like, "Oh, okay." It kind of like legitimized you. Like, we're not just,
Yeah.
taking this money and driving around in Range Rovers or anything. Uh,
Well, how about the biggest advantages? Like, there are things you leapfrog in technology or experience where you said, "Hey, we're not tied down by the history of the past, so we can kind of do something different that gives us a leg up on maybe our more traditional competition that's got some of the baggage coming with them."
so I will say that as a bank, Guarantee Bank and Trust does a very good job in terms of technology. And so our technology is really, really strong. However, we're still that hometown bank that was founded in East Texas 110 years ago. And so when you combine those two, it's one of the greatest combinations that you can do. Because I will tell you, I have no problem or any qualms with any banks, but I do think you should always bank your size. And I think a lot of times people will be at, larger banking institutions and they are a small business and they don't feel like they're getting the service that they need. And so that was our kind of entree, if you will, saying, "Hey, look, we have the tech that you want. However, we can give you that same great service. Here's my cell phone number. Call me when you need me." And I think those two combined really, really gave us an edge on the market. And, you know, I'm very just kind of thankful for that. And plus, again, we've been in business 110 years. So that would probably be another one that's a very strong is that our people know what we're doing. They've been through the challenges in banking history and we're still standing to this day. And, that's kind of a success story in Texas alone. So, I'm very, very happy with, our tech that we have here, our leadership that we have here, and just our people that we have. I will say that would probably be the last thing is we don't have a lot of turnover. And so, when you get to know us as for your small business, you're always dealing with the same person. And, that's a fun thing when somebody calls and it's like, hey, we know what's happening in your business. We know where we're trying to grow you to. And I just love that. I love it.
Let me ask you to just double click a little bit on the phrase you used, bank your size. What do you mean? That's a phrase I haven't heard before. I'm always looking for little tidbits or sound bites, but like it's an interesting concept. What do you mean by you always want to bank your size?
So I think so. What I mean by bank your size is there will be some businesses, and let's say you have a pie business and you really know how to bake some pies and you do it very well. And however, you're just kind of starting out of your kitchen and you got your LLC. A lot of people will go to the bigger institutions to open up an account. And, I think that's good. That's probably right around the corner from you. So, that's good. However, when you start needing that kind of everyday touch of like, oh, I need a cashier's check here. Oh, I need to make a wire here. Oh, I'm ready for a small business loan. A lot of bigger institutions don't pay attention to that very, very important segment. And that's the small business, which I like to say is the backbone of America. And they don't pay attention to that. So, they'll end up getting denied or they won't get the service that they want. You know, as a small institution, because you are a small business or a smaller institution, they'll give you all the time you want. I mean, you can go in there and they'll roll out the red carpet for you and say, "Hey, we love these pies. Let's not only do this, but I'm going to tell my friend about this, or we actually bank this other business that I want y'all to meet each other." And that's really community banking right there, is that you're just kind of taking care of the size. And then I will say it goes to the other opposite end of, sometimes I think, your business is, now it's those same pies, but we've based all this other stuff. And now you have kind of a Walmart-esque business. That will probably be a good business for one of the larger institutions, just because they will have the kind of capacity to really handle, what you need. And that's why I say I never talk about bad about any banks, because I just think they all are great in their own type of ways. And so that's what I mean by kind of bank your size. If you're a small business and you want that friend or you want that partner, come to a community bank.
I heard a really interesting podcast with an investor. Recently. Now I'm like talking about other podcasts on my podcast is bad, but he made an interesting comment about some SaaS businesses where they really knew their market size. Like, hey, we're going to work for you from X size employee to Y, and we kind of like we don't view it as bad when you hit Y and you go somewhere else, because that's not our. You kind of outgrown what we do, and that's not like it's churn and it's bad, but it's like we think of it as a good thing because we know our spot. We know where we add the most value. We want to really serve those customers well. And if you get to the high end, the larger size, you go, we need a different set of stuff. Like that's okay. You know that you know your space, you fit it well, and you kind of are, almost celebrating your customers moving past you because they've grown to a point that that's what they need. I hear the same thing here.
You are in a big way. And I almost feel like that baby bird flying out the nest. Like you want them to spread their wings and fly. And you're almost, for me, because I've had a handful of customers do that, and you almost feel that sense of pride just because this is like, I remember when the big bank didn't want to give you the loan and we were the first ones to take that chance and give you the loan. And we saw the loan go from $25,000 until now you have $1 million loans. And that's one of the greatest kind of success stories that you can have. I mean, for me, I'll tell you on the flip side, I'm always like, hey, that money market account, I can still have that here. So if you wanted to leave, a couple million,
leave that here. It'd be just fine.
Look, look, that's when you go back. Hey, I do remember when you were little, but I think it's a good thing, and I think as bankers, that's what you want to see.
So I want to get to your role in kind of community development engagement, but I want to ask one question before I get there, which is you talked about, and you said mostly your partner. So if you want to duck it, that's fine. But you talked about building a big business in commercial real estate. That was kind of his, genius in credit risk, and you were more on the SMB side. But it seems like this really interesting moment from a commercial real estate point of view as we see companies that, got a lot of real estate pre-COVID are going through remote work, or this shift in the nature of utilization of office space. And I'm just curious if you've got any thoughts on what the future of commercial real estate, what's kind of shaking out over there. Because I don't know how to make heads or tails of quite what's going on. There's still a lot of building, a lot of places, but there's a lot of empty space. And I'm curious if you got any thoughts on like what's going to happen in the commercial real estate space over the next couple of years, because it feels like this kind of strange moment of dislocation in terms of what we expect the utilization of those kinds of spaces to be. And if you say that's not my space, Jeff, that's fine.
Yeah, no, this moment that we're sitting in right now, and this year that we're going to go through as bankers, it's going to be kind of a weird, quirky year, just in terms of loans that we were doing 6 months to a year ago that we would have said, oh, definitely, yeah, let's go. Now we're kind of pumping the brakes on it, saying, okay, let's look at this, but let's look at it in a couple of other ways now that we have to. And, Austin is kind of tricky. Austin is a tricky one because, like we like to say, we are going to be the last ones in, first one out in terms of, we don't want to use the recession word, but, hey, what comes. And, so I think in terms of when you're talking about commercial real estate, it's one of those things you really have to pay attention to the articles. You have to pay attention to the news. You have to pay attention to the Fed. You have to pay attention to all these things and just kind of make sure that you're really on top of it and that knowledge level is really high. Again, I don't want to toot my bank's horn, but that's one of the things that they are really, really kind of good at in terms of just we have the right people in place to make sure that every one of these things that I'm talking about, we have somebody paying attention to. And so those are one of those things that really, really helpful when you have the right people in charge and right people looking at the things. And Guaranty Bank and Trust does a very good job of that. And I will say that, there are times that I think, especially like right now, there's a lot of banks kind of going and blowing and they're like, hey, we want to give you this interest rate. And, they're trying to get market share. And, we're like, hold on, again, we're about relationships. So that is what we are really focused on right now. It's not that where, okay, we just want to do a loan and you don't have anything over here. This is a back and forth. This is a give and take. This is a relationship that we want. Again, kind of the thing that we've been echoing through the conversation is we want to see you go from, this over here, and we want to help you get to that next step. Because when it comes to times like these and other banks are trying to take market share and they're trying to give you a better rate or they're trying to do these, that's when that loyalty comes back in play and says, you know what? Ryan was able to get me through times that nobody else wanted to get me through. And so now, just because the rate's a little better at somewhere else, I'll pass. Because guess what? My bank is tried and true. And I believe in these people just like, we believe in their businesses.
Maybe that's a good point to transition to. You've had a role in kind of the community development engagement, both in the kind of Austin area part of the bank that you started, but I think also in the larger institution. Talk to me a little bit about how you think about what that role is and what your objectives are. I think it's a really interesting aspect of banks, particularly community banks. I mean, it's kind of like the heart and soul of the banking industry is kind of engaging with the community in both financial and other ways. But how do you think about what your objectives are and what you're trying to do in the context of community development within the bank?
Yeah, so back in November of 2022, my bank came to me by my surprise and was like, hey, we got this new role that we think you would be perfect, and we've never done it here at this bank, and we want you to do it. And that is the first community development officer for Guaranty Bank and Trust. This is something that I've been doing since I've started, and that's just being in the community. I'm always here, there. I'm probably out at least 4 to 5 nights a week, just in different avenues in the community. Just because I think, if I really take the word community seriously. If we're going to be a community bank, we need to be in the community. And that looks like a lot of things. That's giving my time, talent, treasure, all those things, and making sure that, Guaranty Bank is doing their job. And so when they came to me and gave me this, obviously I said yes. Obviously, I was like, oh my gosh. And then, so they basically were like, hey, we love what you're doing in Austin. Now we want you to do it in all our metro areas. So now you are over Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, in Houston, and everywhere in between. And that's a big responsibility. I was so happy, and I remember they told me, and then I closed my office door, and I was like, yes. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this?
Now you got to be out 10 days a week. There's not 10 days in the week to be out and about in the different communities anymore, Ryan. You got to pick
Correct.
and choose.
But what does that look like? And so then I thought to myself, like, you know what? I know what that looks like. That looks like exactly what we're doing here. And so one of the things that I've been fortunate is the association. I work with Texas Bankers Association in a big way, and I'm on about 3 different committees with them, and that works throughout the state of Texas, just kind of lobbying for community banks and making sure the avenues that we want to take, we have all the banks kind of in one voice, and then we can actually take that fight to Washington if we feel that the policies that we are trying to change, we can tell the lawmakers. Actually, that's where I came back from a day ago. I was in Washington, D.C. meeting the 118th Congress, the freshman congressman from Texas. And so why those relationships are important is because obviously if you want something, change, you might have to do it policy wise. So that's why that's important. But it gives me an opportunity to talk to all our different markets and say, oh my gosh, we're focused on these areas. So at the bank, we are focused on financial literacy and education, affordable housing, and economic and workforce development. So corporately, those are kind of our big things that we just kind of focus on. Every other market can have their own things, and they're great nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity, or if you have a ballet there, or anything, dogs and cats. We love it all. We love it all. But corporately, those are the things that we focus on. And I will tell you one thing that I truly, truly love is I've been able to meet other community development officers at other banks, both large and small. And the cool thing about that is, we're not actually working against each other. We're working together. So if something cool comes up in Fort Worth and says, hey, we're trying to do affordable housing here, that bank may only be able to give 25,000 to that. And so then you take my 25,000, and then Bank of America comes and says, hey, we're going to give $1 million. We can really make some good magic happen in Texas serving our communities. So that's why this role is just amazing. Obviously, I get to talk to people, not just in Austin, but around Texas now. And it really, basically, they really just gave me a bigger runway. And so I am so just, thankful to them being able just to make my impact bigger. And for me, that's all I want. I just want to do really good work, and I want to be very impactful.
So I want to ask 2 things to follow up on that, because you mentioned a couple things, affordable housing, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, kind of like it's a well-worn path in terms of what we do and how we support that. But the topics of financial literacy and education, I think, is one, at least I find difficult. And we've often compared it to like getting people to eat their broccoli. Like, people don't always want that education. And, even me or my kid, I try to force feed my kids financial education so they grow up smart about different products. I'm curious if you've seen things that work in that space, because I feel like it's a space where we all know the information that needs to get conveyed, but the ways that make it engaging and where the community really embraces what you're doing and you can actually drive successful results. I'm curious if what you've seen or what's worked well for you in that space. And a similar question around workforce development, I think, but I'd like to start with the financial education. It's one of those topics that's like near and dear to my heart that I feel like, and I think it's practically criminal that we don't have real financial education as part of our educational attainment for everybody. You come out of high school and you don't know anything about basic financial products, interest rates, market. I think that's criminal, to be honest, because it's such a critical life skill. And just would love any insights you have on what's been effective at helping you drive real results in that, because I think it's such an important thing for us as a country to get better at doing.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And so there's a lot of things in there. But yeah, so with the financial education piece, it's such an important piece. And like you said, why is this not taught? My CEO even told me that. He's like, you know what, Ryan, I would be willing to put a whole lot of money if we could somehow get this in schools. And he was just kind of saying it, but I took it and I'm like, hey, if my CEO is saying that's what he wants, let's make it happen. And so
Let's go
literally I
do it.
sat there. Yeah, let's go do it. And I sat there and I'm like, how am I going to make this happen? Again, I leaned on Texas Bankers Association. And I said, and I talked to, the CEO, Chris Furlow, who I love. And he acts as a great just mentor. I don't even really make a move without actually talking to him. But I talked to Chris and I said, hey, how do we make this happen? And he's like, hey, we know enough people where we can. And so with Texas Bankers Association, I'm a part of American Bankers Association too. And so we have now kind of set a plan in place where we are going to work with the state of Texas in terms of getting a couple of school districts and using them kind of as, kind of a program to see, okay, we want to put financial literacy courses in here. Let's kind of see how this takes off. And so I will tell you right now with that, a lot of states are paying attention to Texas right now, just because we have the tools, we have what we need to make that happen. And so we went into a couple school districts and said, hey, this is the courses that we need you to teach. And I will tell you, this came from somebody that's very important to me, and a little genius herself is my wife. We were literally sitting at this conference where I was receiving an award, and so she was there, and they were talking about financial literacy and the state of Texas. And she used to work for TEA, Texas Education Agency, and she's like, of course, she goes in and she's like, Ryan, why aren't y'all doing this? They already have courses here. You could just put those courses together and we can teach something. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's what we were doing already. You're just saying it out loud. But really, I will tell you how that went. That conversation went between me and her. She told me, I was kind of like blown away. And then I called Chris Furlow and I was like, hey, Laura just thought about how we were going to do this. And we thought of a plan, and that's how we got the curriculum. And then we're going to put it in, these kind of school districts that we think would it work. And we're just going to see how it works. And I think it actually is going to work. And so a lot of other association presidents around the nation have actually started talking to Chris and saying, hey, we like what y'all are doing over here. So, before you know it, it's going to, kind of catch like fire.
Wildfire, yeah.
Wildfire. And then, again, that's where knowing, these members of Congress can help too, because they actually have big microphones and, they're the ones that are appropriating the money. And so that's just kind of how it works. So I cannot wait until, this really gets off the ground and I can go back to my CEO and say, hey, you said you would love to do this. Boom, we got it, and again, you can see my smile and you can see how excited I am about it because, it's important. And another thing that you said is affordable housing. One reason why affordable housing to me is important is because I don't feel that anybody will care about financial literacy if you have nowhere to stay. You know what I'm saying? Fair. Like that keeps on going down on the list because you're worried about how am I going to take care of my family?
It's a hierarchy of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If I don't have housing, the rest of it's just
correct. And the thing is, in America right now, housing and 401ks, those are some of our biggest ways that we get wealth. And so if communities don't know about these things, that's not going to happen. And my whole thing in life is I don't want it to be where I'm sitting there, reflecting on life and I'm saying, wow, I've done this. I've got to do this. I've got to go places around the world. Is that really fun if I don't bring anybody with me, so to speak, in terms of if my neighbor can't do that or the neighbor down the street can't do that? It's really not. It's really sad in a way. And so that's our job, your job, my job, to make sure that, your neighbor, your community member has the tools that they can to fly. And so, affordable housing is one of those things that it's really hurting our bigger cities. I will say that a lot of frontline staff in most industries can't live within the city anymore that they're working in. And so we have to figure this out. And so one thing that Guarantee was allowed me to do is we actually did $1 million investment into Austin affordable housing. And so what that looks like is there is a private group of investors in Austin that have purchased multifamily units, and they are then renting them out to frontline workers. So your nurses, our teachers, and they are putting it at a rate where they can actually afford. And so, with that, why they actually can afford this rate, we're putting through financial literacy classes. So, not only that money that you're saving, we can actually put that to work, and we can then get down payments. And we're working with people on down payment assist, and it kind of just snowballs into this thing to where now they can afford a home for their family, and then they have financial literacy, and then they're going to be great people to contribute to our workforce, and then then the economic stability happens. So that's where, when we talk about the areas that Guarantee is trying to make an impact in, that's where they all kind of go together. And I hope you can now see kind of the bigger picture of what the plan that we're kind of attack, so to speak.
Just give me. I love how it all connects together. I did want to double click a little bit more on the last area you talked about, and then we're gonna have to wrap this thing up because we're running over time. But
Oh wow, I'm sorry.
which was the workforce development and when there's so much interesting things to talk about, it just less stuff happens, and it's fine.
Yeah.
It's the beauty of podcasts. There's no there's no set time period you got to be done before the commercial break and the next show. We get to go as long as we want. But what are your priorities, or what are you seeing in terms of workforce development? Because I feel like the nature of work is shifting so much. This idea of how do we develop the workforce for the future and for what's coming down the pipe is such an important one. What are you guys' areas of focus, or what are you doing on that front?
Yes, I was just talking last night to somebody, and they were just we were talking about how a lot of these jobs with these skills are really kind of going away, because I will tell you the tech industry has done a really good job of marketing themselves, saying, "Hey, come be in tech." I mean, obviously that works because of these big paychecks that they are offering, college graduates right out the back. So I see why it's working. However, what's happening is that our skilled labor force is kind of going away. And so if we take banking, for instance, one of the biggest things that I want to make sure that happens is that I see more people of color in my industry. And then I would say that's one. And then 1A would be women as well. And not just women in the industry in terms of, oh, Ryan, but we have like 75% women working at this bank. No, 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 no. I'm talking about women in leadership that gets to that executive level. And so one of the things that we're doing in banking is at Texas Southern University in Houston, they have opened the first banking program at an HBCU in the nation. And HBCU, historically Black College University. And so when I saw that they were doing that, and actually TBA, Texas Bank Association, gave the first $100,000 of seed money for that. And now I think they've raised over 4 million. And so when I saw that, I came to my bank. It was like, hey, I know the first place that I want to write a check to. And, they just gave me this role in, November, December. And they're like, okay, let's go. And so I explained that to them. And why that's important is because not only do I want to write a check to the program, but, I also want their interns. I want, young men and women to come and say, hey, look, come intern here. I want to get you used to working in a bank environment. And then after that, once they graduate, I want them to say, hey, come back here, come work for here. Some people might want to go to a bigger bank or any kind of bank, but at least that is helping, the industry as a whole, because I do know that, like a lot of banks, we're having trouble hiring frontline workers. And again, that goes back to that affordability and all those kind of problems. However, I do think if we start putting money into places, into universities, into programs that can help that's one way of many that can help us with this whole workforce problem. And I think every industry probably has something where you can pour money into it in terms of helping. And sometimes it's just not money. I know that, at Texas Southern and probably a lot of other banking schools, they would really love the help of some of these seasoned bankers coming in here and saying, hey, can you teach class on credit or, financial analysis? They're going through all that kind of stuff. And so again, that's kind of my PSA in terms of, hey, you don't have to just give your money, but you can give your time as well. Um, and so, yeah, no, workforce development is just it's huge. But again, if you look at that kind of circle graph that I'm saying, it all kind of relates to each other and all makes sense. And if we can do it all together, we can definitely uplift these communities that we live in. Because, I love to say that, if you can see it, you can be it. And I think a lot of these kids coming out of some of these communities, they didn't really know that banking was an option. Because like you said, when we started, like people just kind of fall into it. And so I've decided, hey, we have to do a better job of marketing ourselves. Yeah, we might not be as sexy as a tech company, but we can also promote stability. As all these layoffs happen in the tech industry, those aren't happening in the banking industry. And you can still make some really good money in the banking industry. And like I like to say, you can have a meaning and a purpose and help out your community. So I think it's a win-win. And plus you get to work with people like Jeff. Come on now. Who don't want to do that?
I can think of a few, but I think it's a good point overall. Ryan, I appreciate all this. I got 3 standard questions I ask everybody at the end of the podcast. If you don't mind, I'm going to throw them at you now and see what you got for us. You ready?
Yeah.
My lightning round. All right. Here's the first one. What's the best piece of career advice you've ever gotten?
From my dad. He would always tell me,
that.
hey, I don't know everything about everything. So when you get somebody in front of you that's willing to teach you about something, take their advice, sit there, pen and pad, let's go.
All right. Take your opportunities to learn. I love advice from parents. I think it's some of the best we get on the show. Second question. What's the best piece of advice you've gotten about the banking or lending space in general?
Always be a learner. I mean, always be a student. Always be a student ready to learn. I was actually just sitting at a dinner the other night, and I had the just pleasure of sitting with 4 bank CEOs and me. And I told them, I said, I am not taking this opportunity and not asking y'all questions. And, one of them, actually, it was Jeff Austin out of Austin Bank out of Jacksonville, Texas. He told me, he's like, always be willing to be a learner. And he is so right. I'm ready just to soak it all up.
All right. Lots of emphasis on learning. And my last question for you, what's one bold prediction for the future? Something we can bring you back and hold your feet to the fire, see if you got your prediction right. But something, bold prediction about what's coming down the pipe.
What's coming down the pipe? Well, what's coming down the pike in banking is it is no longer going to look like banking of yesteryear. Banking is going to look very differently. That means the workforce is going to look differently. That means the customers are going to look differently. That means our train of thought of how we, got this far for 110 years. That means that you have to be progressive enough to say, hey, we see this coming and we have to be ready to kind of pivot, duck and weave. And like I said, our bank is doing a very great job of that. And so I guess that's not really a prediction. That's what is going to happen. But I think if you kind of stay true to values and make sure you're just really kind of charting the course, you'll be just fine.
And if you're a constant learner looking for opportunities to learn and being willing to take notes when you find them, then you're probably going to be well served by that in a changing environment.
You got it.
All right. Ryan, I appreciate you joining us today and sharing your perspective. This was a fascinating conversation. Thank you. Thank you for making the time.
No, thank you, Jeff. This has been amazing. Thank you for the opportunity.